Commander Blake Thornfield watched the slight figure approach the advanced marksmanship station and shook his head before she even reached the firing line. Not a chance in hell, he muttered to Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chun, who stood beside him reviewing the day's training roster. Chun glanced up from his clipboard and followed Thornfield's gaze to Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, noting her unremarkable appearance among the group of elite operators gathered for the impossible shot drill. The morning sun cast long shadows across the specialized range, where 3 precision targets had been positioned at varying distances and angles, each requiring split-second timing and perfect accuracy to engage successfully. 23 of the Navy's finest marksmen had attempted the sequence over the past 2 hours. 23 had failed to complete it within the required 4-second window. Vasquez stepped up to the equipment table where Lieutenant Jake Morrison was explaining the drill parameters to the next group of candidates. She's going to ask for a turn, Thornfield predicted, watching her study the target configuration with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to her obvious inexperience. Morrison caught sight of her approach and immediately launched into his standard disclaimer about the advanced nature of the exercise. This sequence has a 6% success rate among our most experienced operators, Morrison explained, his tone suggesting she might want to observe rather than participate. The first target requires engagement at 400 meters with a crosswind compensation factor of 2.3. The second target appears at a 45-degree angle requiring immediate transition and recalibration. The third target drops into view for exactly 1.2 seconds before disappearing behind cover. Thornfield watched Vasquez nod thoughtfully as Morrison continued his technical briefing, noting how she seemed to absorb every detail without the intimidation that typically accompanied such explanations. Behind her, Petty Officer First Class Ryan Kowalski exchanged glances with his training partner and whispered something that made both men chuckle softly. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar moments where someone's capabilities were underestimated in your community. She wants to attempt the sequence, Morrison announced to the assembled group, his voice carrying the subtle tone of someone preparing to witness an inevitable disappointment. Thornfield stepped forward, his experienced eye taking in her standard-issue equipment an unremarkable stance. The Barrett rifle she would need to use weighed nearly 30 pounds and required exceptional upper body strength to manage effectively during rapid target transitions. You understand this isn't a basic marksmanship drill, Thornfield said, approaching close enough that his words carried to the other candidates watching from the observation area. This is designed to test the absolute limits of precision shooting under extreme time pressure. Even our veteran snipers struggle with the technical requirements. Vasquez met his gaze directly, her expression remaining calm despite the obvious skepticism surrounding her. "I'd like to try," she replied simply, her voice steady and confident in a way that seemed incongruous with the doubt being expressed by everyone around her. Chin stepped closer to the firing line, clipboard still in hand, and addressed her with the patient tone typically reserved for explaining obvious realities. "The failure rate here is 94%, he said, glancing at his notes. That includes operators with multiple combat deployments and advanced sniper school certifications. Most candidates don't even engage the second target before time expires." Around the observation area, conversations began focusing on the developing situation as word spread that someone new was attempting the impossible shot. Kowalski leaned toward his partner and made a quiet observation about the entertainment value of watching another inevitable failure, while Morrison began preparing the electronic timing system that would track her attempt. Thornfield found himself studying Vasquez more carefully, trying to identify what gave her the confidence to attempt something that had humbled far more experienced shooters throughout the morning. Her equipment appeared standard, her physical build unremarkable for the demands of precision shooting, and her demeanor suggested someone who had never faced the reality of such an advanced challenge. The range fell into expectant silence as Vasquez approached the Barrett rifle, its massive frame dwarfing her as she began her initial equipment check. 26 pairs of eyes watched her every movement, most anticipating the moment when the technical demands would overwhelm her preparation and force the inevitable withdrawal that Thornfield had seen from countless overconfident candidates. "This should be interesting," Chun murmured to Thornfield, both men settling into position to observe what they expected would be a brief and unsuccessful attempt at one of the military's most challenging marksmanship exercises. Morrison activated the digital display, showing the precise, technical specifications that had defeated every operator that morning. "Target 1 sits at 412 meters, he announced, pointing to the distant steel plate barely visible through the morning haze. Wind speed varies between 8 and 12 knots from the northeast, requiring constant recalibration between shots. Target 2 appears at 315 meters on a mechanized pivot that exposes it for exactly 2.8 seconds before rotating back to cover." Vasquez studied the display intently, while Thornfield continued his internal assessment of her chances. "The third target represents the real impossibility," Morrison continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a mathematical proof. "It drops into view at 260 meters for 1.2 seconds, then disappears behind ballistic cover. Total engagement window for all 3 targets is 4 seconds from first shot to completion." Behind them, Kowalski was explaining to a newly arrived group of operators why they should pay attention to the upcoming attempt. "You want to see what overconfidence looks like," he said, gesturing toward Vasquez as she began examining the Barrett's scope adjustments. "She thinks she can do what Master Chief Rodriguez couldn't manage this morning." Rodriguez had 22 years of combat experience and walked away after missing the second target by 3 inches. Chun checked his stopwatch and noted the wind conditions on his datasheet, then addressed Vasquez directly. "The record time for successful completion is 3.7 seconds, set by a DevGru operator last year. Most attempts fail on target transition timing. The rifle weighs 29 pounds fully loaded, and managing recoil recovery between shots requires exceptional physical conditioning and technical precision." Thornfield watched her hands as she examined the weapon, noting her familiarity with the controls despite his expectation that she would struggle with the advanced optic system. "Every candidate receives 1 practice shot to verify 0, he explained, though he suspected she would need considerably more preparation time than the single round typically allowed. "The Barrett's recoil impulse is significant enough to affect follow-up shot placement if you're not properly positioned." Morrison began setting up the electronic target system while explaining the exact sequence timing to Vasquez. "First target exposure is continuous until engaged," he said, checking the computer controls. "Second target begins movement immediately after your first shot registers impact. Miss the timing window on target 2, and target 3 never appears. The system is designed to test absolute precision under maximum time pressure." Around the observation area, conversations centered on betting pools that had formed throughout the morning as various operators attempted the challenge. $15 says she doesn't even hit target 1, someone whispered to his companion. "The Barrett kicks like a mule, and she doesn't have the body mass to control it properly during rapid fire." Vasquez completed her equipment inspection and looked up at Morrison. "Ready when you are," she said, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the technical complexity he had just explained. Morrison glanced at Thornfield, who nodded despite his private conviction that this would be another expensive waste of ammunition on an impossible challenge. Chun positioned himself at the spotting scope while other operators gathered closer to observe the attempt. The morning had already provided several entertaining failures, including one candidate who had fumbled the rifle during target transition and another who had become so frustrated with the timing requirements that he had simply walked away from the firing line. Thornfield found himself wondering what military background had given Vasquez the confidence to attempt something that had humbled operators with decades of specialized training. Her service record hadn't crossed his desk, and her appearance suggested someone with limited exposure to advanced marksmanship challenges. Yet something in her methodical approach to the equipment suggested a familiarity that seemed inconsistent with his assessment. The Barrett's effective range extends well beyond our target distances. Morrison continued his technical briefing, but these targets require precision that most operators never develop. Windage calculations change constantly between shots, and the mechanical timing eliminates any opportunity for deliberate aim correction. You get one chance at each target with no margin for error. Kowalski moved closer to the firing line, apparently eager to witness another failure firsthand. "This should be over quickly," he murmured to his partner. Most people realize the impossibility once they feel the Barrett's weight and see the actual target distances. Smart candidates withdraw before wasting everyone's time. Vasquez settled into position behind the massive rifle, her movements precise and economical as she adjusted the bipod legs and verified her sight picture. The weapon dwarfed her frame, leading Morrison to check his safety protocols one final time before authorizing the attempt. 3 electronic beeps would signal the start of the 4-second countdown, with target exposures beginning immediately afterward. Thornfield positioned himself where he could observe both her shooting technique and the target impacts, though he expected the exercise to conclude unsuccessfully within the first few seconds. The range fell completely silent as Morrison prepared to initiate the sequence that had defeated every previous challenger that morning. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chun lowered his binoculars and turned to address the growing crowd of observers. "In 12 years running this range, I've seen exactly 4 successful completions of this sequence," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of extensive experience. 3 were accomplished by operators with multiple sniper school certifications and combat deployments exceeding 18 months. The 4th was a fluke shot by someone who admitted afterward he was guessing on windage. Lieutenant Morrison checked the wind flags positioned at 50-meter intervals along the range, noting the variable conditions that added complexity to an already impossible challenge. "Current conditions are actually favorable compared to this morning," he said, addressing Vasquez directly. "Wind steady at 9 knots from the northeast." Master Chief Rodriguez attempted this same sequence when conditions were worse, and he's arguably our finest precision shooter. Petty Officer Kowalski moved closer to his training partner and made an observation that carried clearly across the observation area. "She's probably never fired a Barrett in combat conditions," he said, watching Vasquez adjust the rifle's position. "That weapon requires muscle memory that takes months to develop properly. Most people underestimate the physical demands until they feel the recoil impact." Thornfield studied the target array through his spotting scope, calculating the technical requirements that had defeated seasoned professionals throughout the morning. Target 1 requires a first-round hit at 400 meters with crosswind compensation, he explained to a newly arrived instructor. "Miss that, and the timing sequence doesn't initiate. Target 2 appears immediately after first impact, but the mechanical pivot means you have maybe 2 seconds to acquire, aim, and fire before it rotates back to cover." The conversation around the firing line focused increasingly on specific predictions about where the attempt would fail. "She'll struggle with the Barrett's weight during target transition," one operator observed to his companion. "That rifle wasn't designed for rapid engagement protocols. Even experienced shooters have trouble managing recoil recovery fast enough for the timing requirements." Chun positioned himself at the primary spotting scope while Morrison verified the electronic target system's calibration. "The 3rd target represents the real impossibility," Chun announced to the assembled group. "It drops into view for exactly 1.2 seconds at a distance where most shooters need 3 seconds minimum for proper sight alignment. The mathematics simply don't support successful engagement within the time constraints." Vasquez completed her sight picture verification and looked up at Morrison, apparently ready to begin despite the technical impossibilities being discussed around her. Morrison glanced at Thornfield, who nodded reluctantly while privately calculating how quickly this expensive demonstration would conclude unsuccessfully. Behind the firing line, conversations continued focusing on the technical challenges that had humbled far more experienced operators. "The wind variance alone makes this nearly impossible," someone whispered to his partner. You need to calculate different holdovers for each target distance, and there's no time for deliberate adjustments between shots. Even computer-assisted fire control systems struggle with these parameters. Kowalski addressed a question from one of the newer observers about the success rate statistics. "We've had maybe 60 attempts since implementing this drill 6 months ago," he explained, "for completions total, and 3 of those took longer than the 4-second requirement. The only legitimate success was accomplished by an operator who transferred here from DevGru with specialized training we don't typically see." Thornfield found himself studying Vasquez's shooting stance, noting details that seemed inconsistent with his assessment of her experience level. Her positioning behind the Barrett appeared more natural than he had expected, and her manipulation of the rifle's controls suggested familiarity with the weapon system. Yet nothing in her appearance or demeanor indicated the specialized background necessary for this challenge. Morrison began the final safety briefing while Chun prepared the timing equipment that would track the 4-second window. "Remember that target exposure is controlled by electronic systems," Morrison explained. "Miss the timing on any target, and the sequence terminates automatically. There's no opportunity for second attempts or timing adjustments once the drill begins." The betting pools that had formed throughout the morning focused increasingly on specific aspects of the anticipated failure. $20 says she doesn't engage target 2, one operator whispered to his companion. 30 says she struggles with the Barrett's weight during transition. The smart money seems to be on equipment management problems rather than marksmanship accuracy. Chun checked his chronometer and noted the environmental conditions on his data sheet. Temperature is 72 degrees with relative humidity at 43%, he announced. Atmospheric pressure is stable at 30.1 inches. These are actually optimal conditions for precision shooting, which makes previous failures this morning even more significant. Around the observation area, discussions continued about the technical impossibilities that had defeated every challenger. The target sequence was designed by computer modeling to represent the absolute limits of human precision shooting capability, someone explained to a group of newly arrived trainees. It's not meant to be achievable under normal circumstances. The point is to demonstrate the boundaries of what's technically possible. Vasquez made final adjustments to her shooting position while the crowd of observers settled into position to witness what they expected would be another brief and unsuccessful attempt. Morrison raised his hand to signal the beginning of the sequence, his finger poised over the electronic activation switch that would initiate the 4-second countdown and begin the impossible challenge that had humbled every previous challenger. Range Master Chun stepped forward with his clipboard, scanning the liability documentation that accompanied advanced marksmanship exercises. "I need to verify your qualification status before authorizing live fire on this system," he said, addressing Vasquez directly. "The Barrett M82 requires specialized certification for range use, and insurance protocols mandate specific training verification for exercises exceeding standard difficulty parameters." Morrison paused his equipment preparation and turned to observe the administrative discussion developing at the firing line. "What's your background with 50 caliber precision systems?" he asked, his tone suggesting genuine concern about safety protocols rather than simple skepticism. The liability exposure for unauthorized personnel attempting advanced challenges has become a significant issue for range operations. Thornfield moved closer to review the situation, noting how the institutional requirements were adding another layer of complexity to what already appeared to be an impossible attempt. Range safety protocols exist because this weapon system can cause serious injury to unqualified operators, he explained. The recoil impulse alone has resulted in shoulder injuries among candidates who lack proper training preparation. Behind them, Kowalski was explaining to his training partner why the administrative requirements often prevented inappropriate attempts. "Most people don't realize the paperwork involved in advanced marksmanship exercises," he said, watching Chun review his documentation. "Liability concerns mean we can't just let anyone attempt challenges designed for specialized personnel. Insurance companies take a dim view of accidents involving unqualified operators. Chun continued his review of the qualification requirements, while Vasquez waited patiently at the firing line. The Barrett M82 is classified as a special application weapon system requiring documented training completion, he announced to the assembled observers. Range regulations mandate verification of both technical competency and physical conditioning before authorizing live fire exercises exceeding standard parameters. Morrison checked his safety equipment while addressing concerns that had emerged during the administrative review. We've had 3 injury incidents this year involving operators who overestimated their capabilities with advanced weapon systems, he explained. Shoulder dislocations, scope eye injuries, and 1 case of temporary hearing loss despite proper protection. The military takes these safety requirements seriously for good reasons. Around the observation area, conversations focused on the institutional barriers that often prevented inappropriate challenges. Smart policy, one instructor observed to his colleague. Most people don't understand the physical demands until they experience the Barrett's recoil firsthand. Better to screen them out through paperwork than deal with medical incidents afterward. Thornfield studied the growing pile of documentation that Chun was requiring for the attempt. Qualification verification, medical clearance, specialized equipment training certification, he listed aloud. These requirements exist because the failure rate for unqualified personnel approaches 100%, usually accompanied by equipment damage or personal injury. Chun raised additional concerns about the specific challenge parameters that increase liability exposure beyond normal range exercises. The impossible shot drill pushes weapon systems beyond standard operating parameters, he explained. Rapid-fire sequences with heavy recoil weapons require conditioning that most personnel haven't developed. We're not just testing marksmanship accuracy here. Kowalski moved closer to observe the administrative discussion, apparently interested in how the qualification review would resolve. She'll probably withdraw once she understands the liability implications, he whispered to his partner. Most people change their minds when they realize the institutional requirements for advanced challenges. It's not just about confidence anymore. Morrison addressed specific technical concerns that had emerged during previous attempts by unqualified personnel. The Barrett's operating mechanism requires upper body strength that many candidates lack, he explained. Bolt manipulation under time pressure, magazine changes during target transitions, scope adjustment while maintaining firing position. These skills require months of specialized training to develop properly. The conversation around the firing line increasingly focused on institutional policies designed to prevent inappropriate attempts. Range Command implemented these requirements after several expensive incidents involving overconfident candidates, someone explained to a group of newly arrived observers. Equipment damage, medical expenses, and liability exposure force stricter qualification standards for advanced exercises. Chun continued his documentation review, while expressing additional concerns about the specific parameters of the impossible shot challenge. This drill was designed for operators with documented precision shooting backgrounds, he said, glancing at his paperwork. The timing requirements alone eliminate candidates who lack specialized training in rapid target engagement protocols. Thornfield found himself wondering whether the administrative requirements would resolve the situation before the actual shooting attempt could proceed. Most unqualified candidates withdraw when confronted with institutional liability concerns, he observed to Morrison. The paperwork requirements often accomplish what technical explanations cannot. Around the observation area, betting pools began incorporating the possibility that administrative barriers might prevent the attempt entirely. $10 says she walks away during the qualification review, one operator whispered to his companion. 20 says she realizes the liability exposure and decides the attempt isn't worth the risk. Morrison checked his chronometer and noted the time being consumed by administrative procedures. We're approaching the scheduled end of range time for advanced exercises, he announced. Qualification verification needs to conclude within the next few minutes, or we'll need to reschedule for another training period. The institutional requirements continued mounting as Chun worked through his documentation checklist. Each new requirement, adding complexity to what observers expected, would ultimately result in withdrawal rather than an actual shooting attempt that challenged the impossible parameters. Vasquez produced a folder of documentation from her equipment bag, spreading the papers across the equipment table for Chen's review. Her qualification certificates appeared comprehensive, covering advanced marksmanship systems and specialized weapon platforms that surprised the assembled observers. Morrison leaned closer to examine the paperwork, his eyebrows rising as he noted certifications that exceeded typical range requirements. "These credentials look legitimate," Chen announced after several minutes of careful review, though his tone suggested continued skepticism about the upcoming attempt. Specialized sniper school completion, advanced ballistic certification, combat marksmanship instructor qualification. The paperwork meets all institutional requirements for Barrett system authorization. Thornfield studied the documentation over Chen's shoulder, noting details that seemed inconsistent with his initial assessment of Vasquez's capabilities. Her training records indicated exposure to weapon systems and tactical scenarios that typically required years to complete. Yet something about her unassuming presence continued, suggesting someone unprepared for the technical challenge ahead. Around the observation area, conversations shifted from administrative concerns to specific predictions about her shooting performance. "The paperwork doesn't guarantee capability," Kowalski observed to his training partner. "Plenty of operators have impressive credentials on paper, but struggle with practical application under pressure. This drill exposes the difference between classroom theory and real-world execution." Morrison began final preparation of the electronic target system while expressing concerns about the specific parameters that had defeated experienced operators throughout the morning. "The timing sequence is unforgiving," he explained to Vasquez. "Target exposure windows are calculated to the 10th of a second. Miss the transition timing by even minimal amounts, and the entire sequence terminates automatically." Chun checked his environmental monitoring equipment and noted conditions that added complexity to the already impossible challenge. "Wind variance has increased to 12 knots with occasional gusts reaching 15, he announced. "These conditions are approaching the upper limits for precision shooting at these distances. Even computer-assisted fire control systems struggle with this level of atmospheric uncertainty." The betting pools around the firing line became more sophisticated as observers incorporated the new information about Vasquez's qualifications into their predictions. $50 says she hits target 1, but misses the transition timing, one instructor whispered to his colleague. "The credentials suggest basic competency, but this drill requires capabilities that go beyond standard training." Thornfield positioned himself at the primary spotting scope while expressing additional concerns about the technical requirements that had humbled seasoned professionals. "The Barrett's effective range exceeds our target distances, but these targets require precision that most operators never develop," he explained to a newly arrived group of trainees. "Windage calculations change constantly between shots, and the mechanical timing eliminates any opportunity for deliberate aim correction." Morrison activated the target display system, showing the precise engagement sequence that would challenge every aspect of Vasquez's shooting capability. "First target requires immediate engagement with crosswind compensation at 400 meters, he announced. Second target appears on a timed mechanical pivot that exposes it for exactly 2.8 seconds before rotating to cover. Third target drops into view for 1.2 seconds at a distance where most shooters need 3 seconds minimum for sight alignment." Around the observation area, discussions focused on specific technical aspects that typically caused failure among qualified operators. "The recoil management alone eliminates most candidates," someone explained to his companion. "The Barrett kicks hard enough to affect follow-up shot placement, and there's no time for proper recovery between engagements. You need muscle memory that takes months to develop." Kowalski moved closer to the firing line, apparently eager to observe the technical challenges that would soon become apparent. "This should demonstrate the difference between paper qualifications and practical capability," he said to his partner. "Her credentials look impressive, But this drill tests abilities that can't be learned from manuals or classroom instruction. Chun completed his final equipment verification while noting the increasing complexity of environmental conditions. Atmospheric pressure is dropping slightly, and humidity levels are rising, he announced. These changes affect bullet trajectory in ways that most shooters don't compensate for automatically. Even experienced operators struggle with real-time ballistic calculations under time pressure. Vasquez settled into her final shooting position behind the massive Barrett rifle. Her movements precise and economical despite the weapon's intimidating size. The rifle dwarfed her frame, leading Morrison to check his safety protocols one final time before authorizing the attempt that would test capabilities few operators possessed. Thornfield found himself studying her shooting stance more carefully, noting details that seemed to contradict his expectations about her probable performance. Her positioning appeared natural and confident, suggesting familiarity with the weapon system that exceeded what he had anticipated from someone attempting the impossible shot challenge. The range fell into expectant silence as Morrison prepared to initiate the electronic sequence that had defeated every previous challenger. His finger hovered over the activation switch while 28 pairs of eyes focused on the firing line, most anticipating another expensive demonstration of the technical impossibilities that made this drill legendary among precision shooting instructors. Final safety check complete, Morrison announced. Electronic target system is active and ready for initiation. 4-second countdown begins on my mark. Commander Thornfield stepped closer to the firing line and addressed Vasquez directly, his voice carrying the weight of extensive experience with failed attempts. "I want to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider this challenge," he said, his tone suggesting genuine professional concern rather than simple skepticism. Master Chief Rodriguez walked away from the same drill earlier today, and he's completed 3 combat deployments with documented sniper kills exceeding 40 confirmed targets. Morrison checked his timing equipment while sharing additional context about the morning's unsuccessful attempts. "We've had 2 operators with Purple Hearts attempt this sequence today," he announced to the assembled observers. Both withdrew after realizing the technical impossibilities involved. Lieutenant Commander Stevens lasted exactly 12 seconds before acknowledging that the parameters exceeded his capabilities. Behind the firing line, conversations continued focusing on the specific technical challenges that had humbled seasoned professionals throughout the training period. "The mathematics simply don't support success," Kowalski explained to his training partner. "Even if she manages perfect accuracy on all 3 targets, the timing constraints make completion nearly impossible. The Barrett's recoil cycle alone takes longer than the available window between targets." Chun positioned himself at the spotting scope while expressing concerns that had emerged during previous high-stakes attempts. "Psychological pressure affect performance in ways that most operators don't anticipate," he observed. "The knowledge that dozens of experienced shooters have failed creates mental barriers that compound the technical difficulties. Performance anxiety becomes a factor that credentials can't overcome." Around the observation area, the betting pools had evolved into detailed analysis of specific failure probabilities. 70% chance she doesn't complete target transition, one instructor calculated aloud. 20% chance she hits target 1, but struggles with Barrett recoil management. 10% chance she surprises everyone by engaging target 2 before missing the final sequence. Thornfield studied the target array through his binoculars, noting environmental conditions that added complexity beyond the mechanical challenges. "Wind flags are showing variance patterns that change every 30 seconds, he announced. "Professional snipers typically observe conditions for several minutes before attempting precision shots at these distances. This drill eliminates deliberate preparation time." Morrison activated the target movement mechanisms to demonstrate the timing challenges that awaited Vasquez. "Watch target 2 carefully," he said, pointing to the mechanical pivot that would control the second engagement. "It appears for 2.8 seconds, rotates to cover, then remains hidden for 15 seconds before the cycle repeats. Miss that window, and the sequence terminates automatically. The conversation around the firing line increasingly focused on psychological factors that typically affected performance under extreme pressure. Most qualified operators underestimate the mental demands, someone explained to a group of newly arrived trainees. Technical competency means nothing when you're facing a challenge that's defeated everyone else who attempted it. Kowalski moved to where he could observe both the shooting position and the target impacts, apparently anticipating entertainment value from another inevitable failure. "This should be educational," he said to his companion. "Most people don't understand the difference between qualification standards and operational excellence until they face impossible challenges like this one." Chun completed his environmental monitoring while noting conditions that exceeded optimal parameters for precision shooting. "Atmospheric turbulence is increasing due to ground heating," he announced. "Heat waves are beginning to affect target visibility at longer ranges. These conditions add variables that most shooters can't compensate for without extended observation periods." Vasquez made final adjustments to her shooting position while Thornfield continued his assessment of the technical impossibilities she would soon confront. "The third target represents the real challenge," he explained to Morrison. 1.2 seconds exposure time at 260 meters requires reaction speeds that exceed normal human capabilities. Even computer-assisted systems struggle with those parameters. Around the observation area, discussions focused on the institutional significance of continued failures on this particular drill. Range Command designed this exercise to demonstrate the absolute limits of precision shooting capability, one instructor explained. "It's not meant to be achievable under normal circumstances. The point is educational rather than practical." Morrison checked his chronometer and noted the time pressure that would soon affect the attempt. "Range schedule requires completion within the next few minutes," he announced. "Electronic target system has been active for over an hour, and mechanical components require cooling periods between extended sessions." The betting conversations became more specific as observers incorporated their analysis of environmental conditions and psychological factors. $100 says she withdraws after seeing Target 2 movement patterns, one operator whispered to his colleague. Smart money is on voluntary withdrawal rather than expensive failure with ammunition costs. Thornfield found himself studying Vasquez's demeanor for signs of the performance anxiety that typically affected operators facing impossible challenges. Her calm confidence seemed inconsistent with the technical realities she was about to confront, leading him to wonder whether inexperience was preventing her from understanding the true scope of the challenge. Chen raised his hand to signal final preparation for the electronic sequence that would begin the 4-second countdown. "All observers maintain safe distances behind the firing line," he announced. "Electronic target system will initiate immediately after activation signal. There will be no opportunity for delays or adjustments once the sequence begins." The range fell into complete silence as Morrison placed his finger on the activation switch that would begin the impossible challenge that had defeated every previous attempt by qualified operators throughout the morning. Vasquez settled into her final position behind the Barrett M82, her body aligning with a massive rifle in movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. The weapon that had intimidated dozens of qualified operators throughout the morning appeared to diminish in size as she adjusted the bipod legs with precise, economical motions that suggested familiarity exceeding what anyone had anticipated. Morrison raised his hand to capture the attention of all observers before beginning the final countdown sequence. "Once I activate the electronic system, there will be no opportunity for delays or adjustments," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent range. Target sequence initiates immediately, and timing parameters are controlled by computer systems that cannot be modified during execution. Thornfield studied her shooting stance through his spotting scope, noting details that seemed inconsistent with his expectations about her probable performance. Her positioning behind the Barrett displayed technical precision that typically required months of specialized training to develop. The rifle's 30-pound weight appeared manageable in her hands, contradicting his assessment of her physical capabilities. Around the observation area, 32 pairs of eyes focused intently on the firing line where the impossible shot challenge was about to begin. The silence carried weight of anticipation mixed with certainty about the inevitable outcome that had befallen every previous challenger. Conversations ceased entirely as observers prepared to witness another expensive demonstration of technical impossibility. Chun positioned himself at the primary spotting scope while making final notations on his data sheet. "Environmental conditions are stable for the next few minutes," he announced quietly. Wind holding steady at 11 knots from the northeast. Temperature 73 degrees. Atmospheric pressure consistent. These are optimal conditions for precision shooting at extended ranges. Kowalski moved to where he could observe both the shooting position and the electronic target display, apparently eager to witness the specific moment when technical reality would overwhelm confidence. "The Barrett's recoil is going to surprise her," he whispered to his training partner. "Most people underestimate the physical impact until they experience it firsthand during rapid-fire sequences." Morrison began the final safety verification while addressing concerns that emerged whenever inexperienced operators attempted advanced challenges. "Electronic target system is calibrated for split-second timing," he explained. "Miss any transition window, and the sequence terminates automatically. There are no second chances or timing adjustments once the drill begins." Vasquez made minute adjustments to her scope settings, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced efficiency that contradicted the skepticism surrounding her attempt. The Leopold optics system required precise manipulation of windage and elevation settings that most shooters struggled to master under time pressure. Behind the firing line, whispered conversations focused on specific predictions about where the attempt would fail. $20 says she struggles with target acquisition on the second shot, one observer murmured to his companion. "The mechanical pivot timing is brutal, and the Barrett's recoil throws off-sight alignment for most shooters." Thornfield found himself studying the subtle details of her preparation ritual, noting techniques that seemed advanced beyond what her appearance suggested. Her breathing pattern indicated training in precision shooting fundamentals, and her body positioning suggested understanding of recoil management that typically required extensive experience to develop. Chun checked his chronometer and noted the final moments before sequence initiation. "Target array is fully operational," he announced. "Electronic timing system shows green status across all parameters. Mechanical components are functioning within optimal specifications for the impossible shot challenge." Around the observation area, the atmosphere carried tension mixed with certainty about the outcome that awaited. Master Chief Rodriguez's earlier failure had reinforced everyone's understanding that this challenge exceeded normal human capabilities, regardless of credentials or confidence levels displayed by individual candidates. Morrison placed his finger on the activation switch while making the final announcement that would begin the 4-second sequence. "On my mark, electronic countdown initiates," he said, his voice carrying across the silent range. "Target exposures begin immediately after activation signal. Timing parameters are controlled by computer systems and cannot be modified." Vasquez settled into her final sight picture. The massive Barrett rifle stabilized against her shoulder in a position that appeared natural despite the weapon's intimidating specifications. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that precision shooters developed through extensive training, though observers remained convinced that technical reality would soon overwhelm preparation. The silence became absolute as Morrison prepared to activate the electronic system that would begin the impossible challenge. His finger hovered over the switch while every observer focused on the firing line, most anticipating another brief and unsuccessful demonstration of the technical limitations that made this drill legendary among military marksmanship instructors. "Electronic target system activated," Morrison announced, pressing the switch that initiated the 4-second countdown. "Sequence begins in 3, 2, 1. The first electronic beep echoed across the range as the impossible shot challenge that had defeated every previous attempt officially began, with Vasquez poised behind the Barrett rifle that would soon test capabilities few operators possessed. The Barrett M82 erupted with thunderous authority that rolled across the range like concentrated lightning, its .50 caliber report drowning out every other sound for 3 seconds of absolute acoustic dominance. Vasquez absorbed the massive recoil with fluid precision that defied every expectation held by the 32 observers who had witnessed dozens of operators struggle with the weapon's punishing characteristics throughout the morning. Chen's voice cracked slightly as he called the impact through his spotting scope. "Hit," he announced, his tone carrying disbelief that contradicted months of experience with failed attempts. Center mass at 412 meters. Perfect windage compensation despite variable atmospheric conditions. The electronic target system immediately initiated the second phase of the impossible sequence, mechanical pivots whirring to life as Target 2 began its precisely timed exposure cycle. Vasquez was already transitioning, the Barrett's massive frame moving in her hands with control that seemed to violate the laws of physics governing 30-pound precision weapons under rapid-fire conditions. Morrison stared at his chronometer, watching a lapse time that defied every technical calculation he had made about the sequence requirements. .7 seconds from first shot to target transition, he announced, his voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds of the electronic system cycling through its programmed movements. Around the observation area, absolute silence replaced the confident predictions that had dominated conversations throughout the morning. Kowalski's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words emerged as he watched Vasquez acquire the second target with fluid precision that exceeded anything he had witnessed during 3 years of advanced marksmanship instruction. The second target appeared on its mechanical pivot exactly 2.8 seconds after the first impact, exposing steel plate at 315 meters through a window that had defeated every previous challenger. Vasquez's scope tracked the movement with mathematical precision, her sight picture locking onto the target's center before most observers could even identify its location. Thornfield found himself gripping his binoculars with unconscious intensity, watching technical impossibilities unfold in real time. "Her recoil management is perfect," he whispered to Chun, his voice carrying amazement that contradicted decades of experience with precision shooting instruction. The Barrett's cycling didn't affect her sight alignment at all. The second shot erupted with identical authority, the Barrett's report echoing across the range, while Vasquez maintained perfect firing position despite recoil forces that typically required recovery time exceeding the available transition window. Her body absorbed the impact with techniques that suggested training far beyond anything indicated by her unassuming appearance. "Hit," Chen called again, his voice stronger now, but carrying wonder that replaced his earlier skepticism. Target 2, center mass at 315 meters. Elapsed time 1.9 seconds from sequence initiation. She's achieved what no previous challenger has accomplished. The electronic system immediately activated the third and most impossible target. Mechanical systems dropping steel plate into view at 260 meters for the legendary 1.2-second exposure that had become mythical among precision shooting instructors. Most observers had never seen anyone even attempt engagement of the third target, since failures typically occurred during earlier phases. Morrison checked his timing display while struggling to process performance that exceeded theoretical possibilities. "She's beaten Rodriguez's best time by 0.8 of a second," he announced, his voice carrying disbelief that contradicted his professional understanding of human capabilities under extreme time pressure. Vasquez was already acquiring the third target before it fully descended into view, her scope tracking the mechanical movement with anticipation that suggested knowledge of the system's timing parameters. The Barrett remained steady in her hands despite having absorbed 2 massive recoil impulses within less than 2 seconds of continuous firing. Around the observation area, observers stood frozen in positions they had occupied when confident predictions seemed reasonable. The betting pools that had focused on specific failure modes became irrelevant as technical impossibilities transformed into documented reality before their eyes. Kowalski attempted to speak, but produced only whispered fragments. "She's going to complete the sequence," he said, his voice barely audible as he watched the third target settle into its brief exposure position. "That's not supposed to be possible for anyone without specialized training that takes years to develop." The third target achieved full exposure, beginning its 1.2-second countdown toward concealment behind ballistic cover. Vasquez's sight picture locked onto target center with precision that seemed computer-assisted, though observers knew the Barrett scope contained no electronic assistance beyond standard optical magnification. Chun gripped his spotting scope with intensity that reflected his struggle to process what he was witnessing. 3.1 seconds elapsed time, he announced. She has 0.9 seconds remaining to engage the final target and complete a sequence that has defeated every previous challenger, including combat veterans with decades of specialized experience. The range held its collective breath as Vasquez prepared to fire the third shot that would either complete an impossible demonstration or join the lengthy catalog of expensive failures that had defined this legendary challenge throughout months of unsuccessful attempts by qualified operators. The third shot from the Barrett M82 cracked across the range with finality that seemed to suspend time itself, the .50 caliber report echoing off distant hills, while 32 observers held their breath in collective disbelief. Vasquez maintained perfect firing position throughout the recoil cycle, her body absorbing the massive impact with techniques that defied every assumption about her capabilities. Chen's voice emerged as barely a whisper through his spotting scope. "Hit," he announced, the single word carrying weight that transformed months of institutional understanding about human limitations under extreme pressure. Target 3, dead center at 260 meters. Total elapsed time, 3.7 seconds. Morrison stared at his chronometer display, reading numbers that contradicted everything he understood about precision shooting under impossible time constraints. "She completed the entire sequence in 3.7 seconds, he announced, his voice cracking with amazement. "That's faster than the previous record by 0.2 seconds, set by a DevGru operator with 15 years of specialized training." The electronic target system fell silent as its programmed sequence concluded successfully for only the 5th time in operational history. Mechanical pivots returned to neutral positions while timing displays showed achievement that had seemed mathematically impossible when the morning began with confident predictions about inevitable failure. Around the observation area, absolute silence stretched beyond normal parameters as observers struggled to process performance that exceeded theoretical human capabilities. Kowalski stood motionless, his mouth slightly open, staring at the firing line where technical impossibilities had transformed into documented reality within less than 4 seconds of continuous action. Thornfield lowered his binoculars slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to reconcile what he had witnessed with decades of experience in precision shooting instruction. "Her recoil management was flawless," he said, his voice barely audible. 3 consecutive shots with the Barrett under maximum time pressure, and she never lost sight alignment. That's not supposed to be humanly possible. The range remained locked in stunned silence while electronic displays continued showing timing data that would become legendary among marksmanship instructors. Red LED numbers glowed steadily, documenting achievement that had defeated combat veterans, specialized operators, and training personnel with credentials exceeding anything most military personnel would accumulate during entire careers. Chin stepped back from his spotting scope, his clipboard forgotten as he tried to comprehend the scope of what had just occurred. 3 perfect hits under conditions that eliminate 94% of qualified operators, he announced to no one in particular. At distances and timing parameters that represent the absolute limits of precision shooting capability. Morrison began reviewing his equipment displays, searching for technical explanations that might account for performance exceeding documented human limitations. "Electronic timing systems show no malfunctions," he announced. Target mechanisms operated within specified parameters. Environmental conditions were consistent throughout the sequence. Every measurement confirms legitimate completion of the impossible shot challenge. Vasquez remained in firing position behind the Barrett, her breathing returning to normal rhythm while observers continued struggling with the implications of what they had witnessed. The massive rifle appeared comfortable in her hands, contradicting months of assumptions about the physical requirements for managing 50 caliber weapons under rapid-fire conditions. Around the observation area, whispered conversations began emerging as initial shock gave way to attempts at comprehension. That was the most impressive display of marksmanship I've witnessed in 23 years of military service, one instructor murmured to his companion. Her technique exceeded anything taught in advanced sniper schools. Kowalski found his voice after several moments of stunned silence. She made it look effortless, he said, his tone carrying wonder that replaced earlier skepticism. The Barrett's recoil didn't affect her performance at all. Most operators need recovery time between shots that exceeds the available transition windows. Thornfield approached the firing line slowly, his professional assessment struggling to accommodate performance that challenged fundamental understanding about precision shooting under extreme pressure. Her sight picture never wavered, he observed, addressing Morrison while studying Vasquez with newfound respect. Target transitions were executed with timing that suggests computer-assisted calculation, though we know the Barrett scope contains no electronic systems. Chun checked his environmental monitoring equipment, searching for atmospheric conditions that might explain the unprecedented accuracy they had witnessed. Wind remained consistent at 11 knots throughout the sequence, he announced. Temperature and pressure stable. No external factors that would account for performance exceeding normal human capabilities under these parameters. The electronic target system completed its shutdown sequence while displaying final statistics that would become part of institutional memory at the Advanced Marksmanship Facility. Success rate for the impossible shot challenge remained below 6%, but the margin of superiority demonstrated by Vasquez exceeded all previous achievements by qualified operators. Morrison reviewed his timing data while shaking his head in continuing disbelief. 3.7 seconds for complete sequence execution, he repeated, his voice stronger now, but still carrying amazement. That includes target acquisition, windage compensation, recoil management, and precision shot placement at 3 different ranges under maximum time pressure. Around the observation area, observers began moving closer to the firing line, drawn by curiosity about the individual who had accomplished what dozens of experienced operators had failed to achieve throughout months of expensive attempts that had become legendary for their consistent failure rates among qualified personnel. Commander Thornfield approached the firing line with deliberate steps, his professional curiosity overcoming the shock that had paralyzed most observers for several minutes. "I need to see your identification," he said, addressing Vasquez directly while struggling to reconcile her unassuming appearance with performance that exceeded every documented achievement in advanced marksmanship instruction. Vasquez set the Barrett M82 to safe position and reached into her equipment bag, producing military identification that she handed to Thornfield without comment. Her calm demeanor suggested someone accustomed to surprising people with capabilities that contradicted initial assessments based on appearance or assumptions about background. Thornfield studied the identification card while his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something approaching awe. The photograph matched, but the name and credentials listed seemed to belong to someone whose reputation had become legendary among precision shooting communities throughout multiple military branches. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, he read aloud, his voice carrying across the silent range where 32 observers waited for explanation of what they had witnessed. Advanced Scout Sniper School honor graduate, Combat Marksmanship Instructor Certification, Special Operations Command Precision Shooting Specialist. Morrison moved closer to examine the identification, his eyes widening as he recognized credentials that appeared in case studies taught at military academies. These qualifications indicate training programs that most operators never access, he announced to the assembled group. specialized courses that require recommendations from field commanders, and completion rates below 15%. Chen approached from his spotting position, apparently drawn by the discussion of credentials that might explain performance exceeding normal human capabilities. Advanced Scout Sniper School, he repeated, his tone carrying recognition of institutional significance. That is a 6-month program with washout rates approaching 80%. Graduates typically become instructors at facilities like this one. Around the observation area, conversations began focusing on the implications of credentials that had been concealed behind an unassuming appearance and standard-issue equipment. Kowalski addressed his training partner with newfound understanding about the morning's events. No wonder she seemed confident about attempting the impossible shot, he said. Her qualifications exceed those of most instructors here. Thornfield continued studying the identification while noting additional certifications that explained technical capabilities they had witnessed during the 4-second sequence. Combat marksmanship instructor qualification requires demonstrated excellence that places holders among the top 1% of military precision shooters, he announced. This certification allows teaching at advanced training facilities throughout Special Operations Command. Morrison checked his database access while expressing curiosity about operational background that might account for techniques exceeding standard training protocols. Special Operations Command Precision Shooting Specialist indicates field experience with classified missions, he explained. Operators with this designation typically have combat records that remain restricted for security reasons. The conversation around the firing line increasingly focused on professional recognition of capabilities that had been dismissed through assumptions based on appearance. Her technique during the impossible shot sequence makes sense now, Chen observed. Advanced Scout Sniper graduates develop recoil management skills that allow rapid engagement of multiple targets under extreme time pressure. Vasquez remained quietly at the firing line while discussions continued about credentials that transformed understanding of the morning's demonstration. Her unassuming presence had concealed qualifications that exceeded those possessed by most observers, creating a teaching moment about the dangers of assumptions based on superficial assessments. Thornfield found himself reviewing his earlier skepticism with professional embarrassment that accompanied recognition of his flawed assessment. I apologize for questioning your capabilities, he said, addressing Vasquez directly. Your qualifications were not apparent from initial observation, and I made assumptions that proved completely incorrect. Around the observation area, other instructors began approaching to examine identification that explained performance they had thought impossible. Advanced certifications like these require years of specialized training, one explained to a group of trainees. Holders typically become legendary figures within precision shooting communities. Morrison accessed additional information about the Advanced Scout Sniper program while sharing context that helped observers understand what they had witnessed. Graduates of this program hold records throughout military marksmanship communities, he announced. Their techniques become case studies taught at facilities worldwide. Performance like we witness today represents institutional excellence rather than individual luck. Chen studied the identification more carefully while noting details that indicated operational experience exceeding typical training scenarios. Special Operations Command assignments suggest field missions where precision shooting capabilities were tested under combat conditions, he observed. This background explains confidence and technique that seemed impossible for someone with her apparent experience level. Kowalski approached the group examining credentials, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity about training programs that produced such exceptional capabilities. How long did Advanced Scout Sniper School take to complete? He asked, apparently trying to understand the development process that created skills exceeding normal human limitations. Thornfield handed the identification back to Vasquez while addressing the assembled observers with newfound respect for capabilities that had been concealed behind modest appearance. Staff Sergeant Vasquez represents the highest level of precision shooting excellence within military training systems, he announced. Her performance today demonstrates why advanced scout sniper graduates become instructors at facilities throughout Special Operations Command. The recognition spreading through the group transformed the atmosphere from stunned disbelief to professional admiration for achievements that placed Vasquez among elite operators whose reputations preceded them within specialized military communities focused on precision shooting under impossible conditions. Morrison accessed his secure database terminal while the assembled observers waited for additional information about credentials that had transformed their understanding of the morning's impossible demonstration. The system displayed service records that caused his expression to shift from curiosity to something approaching reverence as details emerged about operational achievements exceeding anything typically documented in training facility databases. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez. Morrison read from the classified display, his voice carrying newfound respect across the silent range. Call sign Nightfall. 47 confirmed long-range eliminations during 3 combat deployments. Holder of the military precision shooting record at distances exceeding 800 meters under adverse conditions. Thornfield stepped closer to review information that explained capabilities they had witnessed during the 4-second sequence that had defeated every previous challenger. Nightfall, he repeated, his tone carrying recognition of a reputation that had become legendary within special operations communities. I've heard that call sign mentioned in classified briefings about precision shooting operations in hostile territory. Around the observation area, conversations focused on the implications of operational achievements that placed Vasquez among elite operators whose names appeared in classified case studies. Chun addressed the assembled group with information that contextualized the morning's demonstration within broader military excellence frameworks. 47 confirmed eliminations represent achievement that most snipers never approach during entire careers, Chun announced, his voice carrying professional admiration for documented excellence under combat conditions. Each confirmation requires verification by field commanders and detailed operational reporting that becomes part of institutional memory. Kowalski found himself studying Vasquez with transformed perspective, his earlier skepticism replaced by curiosity about training and experience that produce capabilities exceeding normal human limitations. How do you develop technique that makes the impossible shot look effortless? He asked, his question reflecting genuine interest in understanding excellence that had humbled dozens of qualified operators. Morrison continued reviewing service records while sharing additional context about specialized assignments that explained technical mastery beyond standard training protocols. Special Operations Command precision shooting specialist assignments include classified missions where long-range elimination capabilities were essential for operational success, he explained. These deployments test skills under conditions that exceed any training scenario. The conversation around the firing line increasingly focused on recognition of achievements that had been concealed behind modest appearance and standard equipment. Vasquez had allowed 32 experienced military personnel to underestimate her capabilities while possessing qualifications that exceeded those of most instructors at advanced training facilities. Thornfield addressed Vasquez directly while expressing professional admiration for accomplishments that transformed understanding of precision shooting excellence. Your operational record explains performance that seemed impossible when the morning began, he said. The Impossible Shot Challenge was designed by people who apparently hadn't considered capabilities like yours. Chun studied the database display while noting additional certifications that indicated training beyond standard military programs. Advanced Urban Sniper Course Completion, High-Angle Precision Shooting Certification, Extreme Range Marksmanship Instructor Qualification, he read aloud. These programs represent specializations that most operators never access during entire careers. Around the observation area, discussions focused on implications of discovering that someone with legendary credentials had been present during routine training exercises. Morrison addressed questions from trainees about how such exceptional operators integrated into standard military structures. Personnel with call signs like Nightfall typically rotate through training assignments between operational deployments, Morrison explained. Their presence at facilities like this one provides opportunities for knowledge transfer that benefits entire training programs. We were witnessing institutional excellence rather than individual performance. Kowalski approached Vasquez with questions about techniques that had enabled perfect execution under impossible time constraints. The recoil management you demonstrated exceeds anything taught in standard programs, he observed. Advanced Scout Sniper School must include specialized training that most facilities don't provide. Vasquez responded with professional modesty that seemed characteristic of operators whose achievements spoke for themselves. Advanced training focuses on capabilities required for operational success under conditions where standard techniques prove inadequate, she explained simply. The impossible shot parameters represent challenges that approximate real-world mission requirements. Thornfield found himself reconsidering institutional assumptions about precision shooting limitations based on performance that exceeded documented human capabilities. Your demonstration today will require updates to training protocols, he announced. The impossible shot challenge appears less impossible when attempted by someone with your background and qualifications. Morrison printed documentation from the secure database while expressing institutional gratitude for educational opportunities that emerge from unexpected encounters with excellence. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has provided training value that exceeds anything we typically achieve during routine exercises, he announced. Her presence here represents professional development opportunities for entire instructional staff. Chin approached with questions about operational experiences that develop capabilities beyond standard training parameters. Combat deployments with 47 confirmed eliminations suggest missions where precision shooting skills were tested under extreme pressure, he observed. This background explains confidence and technique that seemed impossible for someone we assumed lacked specialized experience. The recognition spreading through the assembled group completed the transformation from skepticism to professional admiration for achievements that placed Vasquez among military legends whose reputations preceded them within communities focused on precision shooting excellence under impossible conditions that defined operational success in hostile environments. Commander Thornfield stepped forward and rendered a formal salute that carried the weight of institutional recognition for excellence that had transformed everyone's understanding of precision shooting capabilities. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, on behalf of the entire advanced marksmanship facility, I apologize for our failure to recognize your qualifications and request permission to document your technique for future training programs. Vasquez returned the salute with professional courtesy while maintaining the modest demeanor that had concealed legendary capabilities throughout the morning's demonstration. Permission granted, Commander, she replied simply. Advanced techniques should be shared with operators who can benefit from specialized training approaches developed through operational experience. Morrison approached with enthusiasm that reflected his recognition of educational opportunities that had emerged from the unexpected encounter with institutional excellence. Would you consider conducting a demonstration session for our advanced students? He asked. Your technique during the impossible shot sequence represents capabilities that most operators never witnessed during standard training programs. Around the former observation area, conversations focused on professional transformation that had occurred when assumptions based on appearance proved completely incorrect. Chun addressed questions from trainees about lessons learned from witnessing performance that exceeded documented human limitations under extreme pressure. The most important lesson from today's demonstration involves avoiding assumptions about capabilities based on superficial assessment, Chun explained to the assembled group. Staff Sergeant Vasquez possessed qualifications that exceeded those of most instructors here, yet her modest appearance led to universal underestimation of her abilities. Kowalski approached Vasquez with genuine curiosity about training approaches that developed skills beyond standard military programs. Your recoil management technique during rapid target transitions represents mastery that most shooters never achieve, he observed. Advanced Scout Sniper School must include specialized instruction that exceeds conventional training parameters. Thornfield began making arrangements for additional training sessions that would allow facility personnel to benefit from exposure to techniques representing the highest levels of military precision shooting excellence. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has agreed to conduct specialized instruction that will enhance capabilities throughout our program, he announced. This represents professional development opportunities that exceed anything typically available at training facilities. Morrison documented the morning's events while expressing institutional gratitude for educational value that had emerged from routine exercises transformed by unexpected excellence. The Impossible Shot Challenge will require modification based on performance that exceeded our understanding of human capabilities, he explained. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has demonstrated that parameters we considered impossible represent achievable standards for properly trained operators. The conversation around the firing line increasingly focused on professional respect for achievements that had been concealed behind unassuming appearance and standard equipment. Vasquez had transformed institutional understanding about precision shooting limitations while providing educational opportunities that would benefit entire training programs. Chin approached with questions about operational experiences that developed confidence, enabling perfect performance under impossible time constraints. Combat deployments where precision shooting skills were tested under hostile conditions must create capabilities that exceed anything developed through training scenarios, he observed. Your background explains technique that seemed impossible when the morning began. Vasquez responded with professional insight about the relationship between operational requirements and training excellence. Real-world missions require capabilities that often exceed standard training parameters, she explained. Advanced programs like Scout Sniper School focus on developing skills necessary for operational success when conventional techniques prove inadequate. Around the facility, word spread quickly about the morning's demonstration that had redefined understanding of precision shooting excellence. Training personnel from other programs requested permission to observe future sessions where legendary techniques would be demonstrated by someone whose achievements had become institutional case studies. Thornfield expressed formal recognition for performance that would become part of facility history and training documentation. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has provided our program with educational value that will benefit operators for years to come, he announced. Her demonstration today represents the highest level of precision shooting excellence that most military personnel ever witness. Morrison began planning documentation that would preserve techniques for future training applications while expressing professional admiration for capabilities that exceeded theoretical limitations. The Impossible Shot Challenge exists to demonstrate the boundaries of human performance under extreme pressure, he explained. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has expanded our understanding of what those boundaries actually represent. Kowalski found himself studying the Barrett M82 with newfound respect for weapon systems that required exceptional skill to manage effectively under rapid-fire conditions. Watching someone with proper training handle this rifle makes standard instruction seem inadequate, he observed. Advanced capabilities require specialized development that most programs don't provide. The transformation from skepticism to professional admiration completed the educational journey that had begun with assumptions based on appearance and concluded with recognition of excellence concealed behind modest presentation. Vasquez had provided training value that exceeded anything typically achieved during routine exercises. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when others doubted their capabilities. Every person has potential that others might underestimate based on first impressions. Thornfield concluded the morning session while expressing institutional commitment to incorporating advanced techniques into standard training protocols. Staff Sergeant Vasquez will return next week to conduct specialized instruction that represents professional development opportunities exceeding anything previously available at this facility, he announced, his voice carrying respect earned through witnessing impossible achievements that redefined understanding of precision shooting excellence under extreme pressure.